You are standing in a field in ancient Mesopotamia. It's roughly 3400 BC. The sun is brutal. The work is harder. And somewhere nearby, a farmer is tending to a crop that will eventually kill more people than most wars in human history. He doesn't know that yet. He just knows that when you eat the seed pod of this particular plant, something happens to you. The pain stops. The anxiety stops. The world gets very, very quiet. He calls it Hulgil, the joy plant. And this is where it starts. Here's what almost nobody understands about opium. It isn't a modern problem. It isn't a Victorian problem. It isn't even an ancient problem in the way we normally use that word. Opium is older than writing. The poppy plant, Papaver somniferum, has been cultivated by humans for at least 6,000 years, possibly longer. The earliest confirmed archaeological evidence comes from Neolithic lake dwellings in Switzerland, dating to around 5700 BC. Seeds, seed capsules, traces of a plant that had already been traveling with humans for so long that we can't find the beginning of the relationship. By the time the Sumerians were inventing cuneiform, opium was already old. By the time the Egyptians were building the first pyramids, entire trade networks existed specifically to move it from one place to another. By the time anyone thought to write down what it did, it had already been doing it for thousands of years. Let's talk about what opium actually is. The white latex inside a poppy seed pod contains several alkaloids, most importantly, morphine. Morphine binds to opioid receptors in the human brain, receptors that evolved to respond to the body's own natural painkillers, endorphins. When morphine arrives, your brain doesn't know the difference. It just knows that something very good is happening. Pain disappears, anxiety dissolves. A warm, floating sensation moves through the body that ancient writers struggled to describe, and modern writers still struggle to describe, because there isn't really a word for it except the one ancient Sumerians already gave us: joy. The problem, and there is always a problem with things that make you feel this way, is that the brain adapts. The receptors become less sensitive. You need more to feel the same thing. And then, when the poppy isn't there anymore, the body forgets how to make you feel normal without it. That mechanism, tolerance, dependence, withdrawal, was built into the plant's relationship with humans from the very beginning. The Sumerians called it the joy plant. They didn't have a word for addiction yet. The Egyptians understood something the Sumerians had discovered, and the world would keep rediscovering for the next 6,000 years. Opium worked. In 1550 BC, the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever found, describes the preparation of opium mixed with fly excrement given to children to stop them from crying too much. Read that sentence again. A preparation of opium given to children in a medical document in 1550 BC. This wasn't fringe medicine, this was mainstream Egyptian medical practice. The recommended dose was described as beneficial. The text recommends it with the calm authority of a physician who has seen it work many times. The ancient Egyptians also used opium for pain relief during surgery, for headaches, for what we would now recognize as anxiety disorders, and, remarkably, for insomnia, with formulations specifically prepared for different ages and conditions. They weren't wrong about any of this. Opium genuinely works for all of these things. The problem wasn't the medicine. The problem was what happened when medicine became habit.
But let's go back even further, because the Egyptians weren't the first to figure this out. The Minoans, the Bronze Age civilization centered on the island of Crete, appear to have had a goddess of the poppy. Archaeologists excavating a Minoan site at Gazi in Crete found a statue dated to approximately 1300 BC that has become one of the most discussed objects in the archaeology of ancient drugs. It's a female figure with her arms raised. On her head, as a crown, are 3 poppy pods, scored in the exact pattern used to extract opium latex. Not decorative poppies, not symbolic poppies, scored poppies, the technical mark of someone who knew how to harvest them. The goddess of the Minoans, or at least one of them, wore opium as her crown, which tells you something about how central this plant had become to how people understood the world. It wasn't just medicine. It wasn't just pleasure. It was divine. It was ritual. It was a doorway to something that felt bigger than ordinary consciousness. That framing, opium as sacred, as a tool for accessing the divine, will echo through every civilization that touches this plant for the next 3,000 years. The Greeks had a complicated relationship with opium, the way you tend to have a complicated relationship with something you've been using for centuries and can't quite decide whether to worship or fear. Homer mentions nepenthe, a drug added to wine that drove away grief and anger and brought forgetfulness of all troubles. Scholars have argued about what nepenthe actually was for 2,000 years. The leading candidate is opium. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, recommended opium preparations for a variety of conditions: controlled use, measured doses, medicine. But Greek literature also contains some of the earliest warnings. The poppy was associated with Hypnos, the god of sleep, and with Thanatos, his twin brother, the god of sleep and the god of death. 2 brothers, born together, living together, nearly identical. The Greeks who named the poppy's patron didn't do so carelessly. They understood that the thing that put you to sleep could also, if you weren't careful, keep you there. By 330 BC, when Alexander the Great swept through Persia and into Central Asia, he found opium already everywhere. Persian physicians used it. Central Asian traders carried it. The routes that moved silk and spices from east to west had been moving opium along the same roads for centuries before Alexander arrived. He didn't introduce it to the east. He found it there, waiting. What Alexander's conquests did was connect networks that had previously been separate. After the Hellenistic period, the movement of opium across the known world accelerated. It traveled with armies. It was already here.
It traveled with merchants. It traveled with physicians who carried it as the most reliable painkiller available anywhere in the ancient world. Because that's the thing about opium that kept every civilization coming back to it. Nothing else worked like this. For most of human history, if you were in serious pain, from injury, from surgery, from illness, from childbirth, your options were limited to things that either didn't work very well or killed you. Opium worked reliably, powerfully, every time. The price of that reliability was the other thing it did, the thing that happened afterward, the thing that turned a tool into a trap. But in a world without alternatives, the trap was worth it. The Romans took what the Greeks had learned and industrialized it. Theriac,
a compound medicine containing dozens of ingredients with opium as its central active component, became one of the most valued medical preparations in the Roman Empire. Emperors kept private supplies. Physicians built careers around it.
Marcus Aurelius, one of the most celebrated philosopher-emperors in Roman history, took Theriac daily and described in his private writings the difficulty of functioning without it. A Roman emperor addicted to opium, writing about it in his private journal in the 2nd century AD. And here is the part of the story that should stop you. Marcus Aurelius knew what was happening. He wrote about it. He described the fog, the dependence, the way the day felt different when he tried to reduce his dose. He kept taking it anyway. Not because he was weak, because the alternative, the pain and anxiety and sleeplessness that returned when he stopped, was worse. That calculation, that terrible cost-benefit analysis that addicted people have been making for 6,000 years, was already being made in the most sophisticated civilization on Earth by one of its most thoughtful inhabitants. The plant had not changed. The trap had not changed. Only the names changed. By the time Rome fell and the medieval world began, opium had been part of human medicine and human suffering for longer than recorded history. Arab physicians in the Islamic Golden Age refined its use further, creating new preparations, writing detailed pharmacological descriptions, arguing about dosage and danger with a precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe for another 500 years. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the greatest physician of the medieval world, wrote extensively about opium, its uses, its risks, its relationship to addiction. He died, according to some accounts, of an opium overdose. The man who wrote the most comprehensive medical encyclopedia of the medieval world, the man who described opium addiction with clinical precision, who warned about its dangers in writing that physicians would still be reading centuries later, died of it. So when you hear about the opium crisis, the one happening now, the one with fentanyl and oxycodone, and the statistics that scroll across news screens, know that you are reading the latest chapter of the oldest story in the pharmacological history of our species. The plant that a Sumerian farmer called the joy plant in 3400 BC has never stopped being exactly what he said it was. And it has never stopped being exactly what the Greeks knew when they gave its patron the same name as the god of death. Both things are true at once. That's what makes it the oldest story. The Minoan goddess is in a museum in Heraklion, Crete. She still wears the scored poppy pods as her crown. She has been wearing them for 3,300 years. She will probably be wearing them for 3,000 more.